Now, Audi's big electric push in India started way at the top with the e-tron, now known as the Q8 e-tron, and of course the e-tron GT, the sports sedan. But really, this is where things get very, very serious. It's called the Q6 e-tron, and as you may have deduced by that name, it sits lower down in the model range. But there's a whole lot more to this car than just a lower price, and I'm here in Spain to drive it today and tell you all about it. So why don't we get to know this new EV a little bit better, and let's start, as we always do, with the looks. Now, I cannot stress enough how much of a difference it makes seeing this car in person rather than just in photos. They just don't do it justice. And I'm also glad that we have it in white, because a light color really brings out these contrast elements. For one, the grille in Audi's EVs going forward, they will all be body colored, no longer black or chrome like they are in the ICE cars. And instead you have this sort of skirt around the grille, the black contrast feature, which really looks very nice. Down here is the active element. It opens or closes depending on heating, cooling requirements. And over here you'll notice that these are the headlamps, and up here is a very, very elaborate DRL. It's got all sorts of animations and configurations that you can set up. 8 different options, I think, for that. Very cool and very distinctive. Now, as we move over to the side, this is a set of 21-inch wheels, though in India I'm told we'll get maybe 19 or 20-inch, we'll see. And they do resemble the Audi e-tron GT wheels quite a bit, and they look quite fetching on this car. Over here, you'll see a lot of musculature in these lines that come down here. It disappears for a bit and it joins up back there. This black thing is meant to denote the battery down here, and the window line is pretty traditional Audi, but this little ridge over here, the quattro blister as they like to call it in Audi terms, does give it a nice squat stance. What also helps here is the staggered tire size. The rear tires are wider than the fronts, and that is highlighted by the way the rear bumper tapers in at the base. Now it's here around the back where things might look quite simple on the surface of it, but actually the most interesting angle in my opinion. It starts with this badge that says Q6, but that little red rectangle over there is the S-Line package. That's how you know you've got the S-Line design package. It's also got the black pack on this car, which is why the logo is in black. And then these OLED tail lamps, so the new generation of Audi's OLED tail lamps, and they are animated. They have different little animations while you drive along, and can even send you alerts and warning messages to the people behind you under hard braking or when you put the hazard lights on. Tell me what you think about the look of the Audi Q6 e-tron down in the comments. Do you like it? Is it a little bit too plain? And where does it sit in the whole German electric SUV trio when it comes to design? I want to hear from you. And if you, like me, felt the exterior was quite typically Audi, you'll be happy to know that the interior is quite new. Now in here is where Audi has expended a lot of cost and a lot of effort, because this essentially previews the next generation of Audi interiors, and this is the first car essentially to have that. And I gotta say, first impressions are very strong. Gone is that absolutely staid and clinical approach to dashboard and interior design, and in is something more organic and a little bit more textured and layered, and I think that works. It adds a little bit more drama. Let's start with the quality, which in Audi typical fashion is just superb all round. This is a grey upholstered car, but you do get beige and black and a few other colors as well. We'll see which ones make it to India. But one thing they're really proud of is this soft strip, as they call it, which is a leatherette surface that runs from the dashboard onto the doors and is contrast stitched as well. The center console, big suede of piano black over here, and it's kept quite minimalist with the drive selector being this little toggle switch over here, a few touch buttons for drive modes and ESC off, and even the hazard lights. But there are physical buttons for start stop and the volume and track controller, which is an Audi signature. I'm glad they've kept that in. The wireless charger is down here in a big cubbyhole along with 2 USB-C ports, and up here they have a pretty big bin as well. But let's talk about the driver interface. Now here they have this steering wheel that's quite compact, It's round on the sides, flat at the bottom and flat at the top, which in this S-Line package, at least this is the steering you get, and it looks and feels quite sporty. A thing I'm not so happy about are these capacitive touch buttons. Yes, they're very responsive and they work very well. It's laid out very intuitively, but physical buttons would have just been better. You do get paddle shifters to control the regen levels, and yeah, these stocks are familiar, but they're all superb high quality stuff. On that quality front though, while these AC vents look really cool, they do feel a little bit flimsy and don't come with that damped feel that you'd expect of a car at this price and position. But really, the main event is what Audi calls its new digital stage, which is a curved dual screen panel angled towards the driver, made up of an 11.9-inch digital driver's display and a 14.5-inch touchscreen, both of which are incredibly crisp, sharp and bright OLED screens. Optional is that 10.9-inch passenger display that you can't see while the car is in motion. I can see it now, but it blanks it off for the driver so as to reduce distractions. Another big highlight, which I'll tell you more about while I'm driving, is that heads-up display, which is huge, and you'll see more of that out on the road. But all in all, it looks and feels really crisp and sharp. The graphics are really good. The old Audi infotainment was starting to feel dated, but not this one. This feels fresh and bang up to date. Unfortunately, it has swallowed up the AC controls. Yes, the temperature control is permanently on screen, but everything else you have to go into a climate menu, and that takes a few seconds to initialize. Not ideal. I also like how crisp this system is, and you can configure those dials to show you a number of different things. And all in all, the curved layout works well for a driver focus. Although if you're sat here and you want to change your temperature, you kind of have to reach around to this side and access it over there. Small niggle, but otherwise a very focused and very techy looking cabin. The Bang & Olufsen sound system, I can report, is also very good, and it even has resonators in all 4 seats to add that little extra thump. Now, when we did the first look of this car at Munich a little while ago, a lot of you noticed that the car didn't have a sunroof. Now, neither does this one, but we hear that there will be a sunroof on the Indian car when it is launched. Another interesting choice Audi has made is to put all the controls, including the lights, the mirrors, the lock, unlock, and the child locks, and the seat memory function into one touch panel on the door. Now, while it looks quite cool, I wonder about how effective that is, because your hand is going to go there when it's not on the steering wheel, and you could touch any of those and set them off. So let's see how that is in practice, but at least it looks pretty cool. But what do you think about the Audi Q6 e-tron's interior? Let me know down in the comment section. Me, I think while it might not have the wow factor of some of the other German luxury EVs, it makes up for that with that typical Audi restraint, which I like. But perhaps it's a bit too restrained in the backseat. So they've done a pretty interesting thing with the backseat of the Q6 e-tron, and that's because with EVs you tend to have to make a compromise between seat height, seat angle, all because of the batteries that are placed underneath. The good news is here you're not sat too low, you don't get that sense. Thigh support could have been a little bit better, but you're angled in such a way that your knees are sort of automatically contoured to the seat, and you can tuck your feet quite well under the front seat, and that's really good. The backrest angle is also pretty good, and the good news is that there's plenty of headroom. This is set to my position. It's scooped out a little bit here to give you that bit more relief for your knees. And yeah, all things considered, it's not the ultimate chauffeur-driven car, but it does pretty well. Quality, like up in the front, is very good. You get similar AC vents to the ones you get up front, although the climate control unit itself looks and feels a little bit basic for a luxury car. Maybe they can swap that out for something a little bit more high-tech when it comes to India. You also get 2 USB Type-C ports back here, although there are no window blinds, at least on the European version. As mentioned, for India, we are likely to get a sunroof, a panoramic one at that, and all things considered, though it's not the ultimate back seat for the chauffeur-driven, it's more than spacious enough. And speaking of space, you get a very usable 64-litre frunk and a whole lot more at the back. Now, electric cars tend to sacrifice a bit of practicality to batteries and rear-mounted motors, but the good news is that the Q6 e-tron, despite all that, still has a pretty sizable 526-litre boot. As you can see right now, it's got mine and someone else's luggage, 2 big suitcases, could probably take a third one, and a little bit more to spare. The good news is, for India, we will likely get a space-saver spare tire underneath the floor, but this being a European car, it does not have that. Bags loaded, it's time to hit the road because we've got a gorgeous drive ahead of us in Basque country on some narrow and twisty roads. Let's get under the Q6's high-tech skin. Okay, now right from the outset, there are 2 cars that I'm going to keep referring to over the course of this video that will help better put this car into context, and I'm lucky enough to have driven both of them. The first is the Q8 e-tron, this car's bigger sibling, which we are actually using at the Autocar office as a long-termer at this very moment. And the other is the Porsche Macan, which shares the same PPE platform as this car. Let's start with the Q8 e-tron because though this car is its bigger sibling, and yes, it is a whole 130 millimeters longer, that's how you'd recognize it put side by side with this one. In reality though, the wheelbase is only about 28 or 29 millimeters longer of that car, and it's about the same width and height. And really, on a narrow road like this, I can tell you that this feels like a big car from behind the wheel. That's until you get used to it and you realize that the steering is quite neat, quite sharp, and turns the front end of this car in with quite a lot of confidence. Now, a twisty road like this really begs for dynamic mode, so that's what I'm going to do right now. And yeah, immediately there's a bit more weight to everything, right from the steering to the accelerator pedal. It's a bit more urgency from the powertrain. And I have to say, despite how big this car actually is, it's pretty agreeable to drive on a road like this. And this isn't even the SQ6, this is just the standard Q6. Now, speaking of, this car has dual motors. It's got a permanent magnet synchronous motor at the back and an asynchronous motor up front. This is one way it's different from the Porsche Macan, which has permanent magnet synchronous motors front and rear. And the reason Audi says there is that difference is that while the Macan is all about the performance, delivering maximum performance at all times, this one is more an everyday car, and therefore it focuses more on efficiency. Now, an asynchronous motor up front isn't active all the time and therefore works more efficiently, whereas most of the work is done by the more powerful motor out back. And yes, you can feel that rear bias in the power delivery. Put your foot down and you can sense that push from the rear. It's not that typical Audi quattro claw at all 4 wheels equally. No. This one feels distinctly rear biased, and yes, that is a new thing for Audi, isn't it? In fact, the only other rear biased Audis in recent memory have been their sports cars, the R8 and the e-tron GT. So to have this in a mid-range luxury SUV is quite a novel and welcome feeling. It makes it all the more pleasurable on a road like this, and also frees up the front axle, relatively speaking, to handle more of the steering and to really take care of that job and give you better feel through the wheel. Now onto that powertrain. In this configuration, it makes about 285 kilowatts, which is about 388 horsepower. And with a 100 kilowatt hour battery, it's claimed to give a range of 625 kilometers on the WLTP cycle. Now, stat nerds, you might remember that's 25 kilometers more than the Q8 e-tron that we have in India. And that has an even bigger battery, 114 kilowatt hours. The reason it does that is, well, efficiency. It's ultimately what leads to more range, and of course we'll have to do a proper test when this car comes to India in our conditions. But the simple fact is, through a combination of aerodynamics and just a more efficient powertrain on the whole, this car is able to go further even with a smaller battery. At the heart of it all is the PPE or Premium Platform Electric, an 800-volt architecture co-developed with Porsche and shared, as I mentioned, with the new Macan EV. The new gen 100 kWh lithium-ion battery pack uses prismatic cells with an NMC chemistry, arranged in 12 modules of 15 cells each, allowing for greater safety and modularity. It can be charged at up to 270 kilowatts on a DC fast charger, and Audi says it will get from 10 to 80% in just 21 minutes, as it can sustain faster charging for longer. The platform and motors will also make their way into a coupe SUV, the Q6 Sportback e-tron, and a sedan, the A6 e-tron, which will follow soon. Now this particular car is riding on 21-inch wheels and on air suspension. I don't know exactly what the combination finally will be for India, though I suspect they'll go a size or two down on the wheels for our conditions, which is just as well, because even on these air springs, although I am in dynamic mode right now, with these large wheels and tires, it is quite fidgety on a less than perfect road surface, which is what we have right now. Dialing it back to comfort mode does ease things off a little bit. In fact, we were out on a motorway earlier, and in those conditions at high speeds, just loping down the highway, it actually felt quite soft. Now that's something buyers will have to bear in mind, particularly if they want to use this as a chauffeur-driven car. That said, with adaptive dampers and a number of different drive modes to play with, it's possible to find a setup that suits any situation. Now, one thing I mentioned that I would talk about was this heads-up display, and boy is it worth a mention. Yes, we've seen head-up displays before, but this one has such a wide field of view, which you can adjust to an extent, of course. And it combines that with some brilliantly executed AR assistance. What do I mean by that? Well, it has graphics that show up on the road, telling you exactly when you're cutting over the line when you're using lane keep assist, draws a little line following the lane, and is so helpful as a visual aid to let you know to just get back into the center of your lane. Similarly, it syncs up with the navigation and gives you turn-by-turn instructions in front of you on the heads-up display, projected virtually onto the road. It's all very sci-fi, but I think once you get used to it, you probably won't be able to do without it after a little while. On that note, this car comes with a full suite of ADAS functions, although it remains to be seen if or not Audi brings these features to India. One thing it will be bringing to India is a Q6 with even higher performance, and luckily we got to drive that one as well. Now, following on from the Q6 e-tron will be the SQ6 e-tron. Audi has just announced it will be coming to India too, and that's great news for performance EV enthusiasts. Now, though this car packs in the exact same hardware in terms of powertrain, that is a permanent magnet synchronous motor at the back and an asynchronous motor up front, power has been wound up to as much as 516 horsepower. Now that admittedly is under full load, under full acceleration, using launch control. But I gotta say, even at medium speed driving that we're doing right now, it feels instantly more potent than the standard Q6 e-tron. The thing is, when you have it in comfort mode, it's quite quiet, the steering is quite light, and it still feels very relaxed and easy to drive, as is the case with even the ICE S cars. But that all changes when you dial it up to dynamic mode. First things first, you can hear the mechanical virtual noise come in, and it's slightly different from the mechanical virtual noise you get in the Q6 e-tron. It's more aggressive, it's sportier, and it delivers that S feel. Then you notice the steering weights up a little bit, and the responses are a whole lot sharper. I said it before with the Q6, and it's even more apparent here in the SQ6. This car has a rear power bias. It feels rear wheel driven, with the front axle only playing a supporting role. That makes it a lot of fun to hustle around a winding road like this. What's really surprising is the agility of this car. It's not a small car, it's not a light car, but the steering response and the front axle behavior is really quite pure and quite engaging. Now, this car has slightly different suspension hardware compared to the standard Q6 e-tron. It's a little bit firmer setup, and you can feel that for better or for worse. For better, absolutely on a twisty road like this. Body roll is incredibly well contained for a big tall SUV like this. And as I said, agility is something that belies this car's size. As for worse, yeah, even though this is riding on air suspension, it's a slightly different calibration for the adaptive ride, and it doesn't have quite that floaty lightness that you get in the standard Q6. It is a little bit busier. Whereas with all S cars, I think that's a compromise that buyers might be willing to make.
And in case you want an even harder, faster, more focused Q6 e-tron, Audi is developing an RS version with over 600 horsepower. Let's hope they bring that one to India too. For most people, however, this one will feel more than potent enough.
Now, interestingly, for the standard Q6 e-tron, Audi says that the friction brakes, or the actual mechanical brakes that you use the pedal for, only come into play about 10% of the time. 90% of the time in everyday driving, you're going to be using the regenerative brakes. And that's really something. That's something only an EV can do. Now, I suspect that ratio is a little bit different for the SQ6 e-tron because, yeah, it's far more performance oriented. But I have to say that the brakes feel very, very strong, very reassuring, and the brake blending is just incredible. You can't tell the moment when it switches from the regen brakes to the friction brakes, and that's really something.
What's most surprising about the SQ6 e-tron and even the Q6 e-tron is how fun to drive they are. They feel light on their feet, the steering is sharp and quick, and there's a beautiful rear bias to the power delivery, which are all things you can't always say about Audis that don't have an R in their name. The 516 horsepower SQ6, just like all S cars, is a genuine everyday performance car, now with the added practicality of an SUV. But what's really going to change things up is the normal Q6 e-tron, because we hear Audi plans to price it quite aggressively at around 85 lakh rupees ex-showroom. At that price, it has no direct rivals in India and will sit between the compacts and full-size luxury electric SUVs. It may not be as flamboyant as the others, but in true Audi fashion, it goes about its business quietly, effectively, and with dignified restraint, with no compromise to luxury, quality, and tech. When it goes on sale by the end of this year, we expect it to be nothing short of a winner.